Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. Tonight I bring you an interview that I did with a chap called Connor, who's a new member of BBR, and we were in contact because he actually worked in Delamere Forest, and that's an area where we have quite a number of dogman reports. Now, Connor worked at the Go Ape Centre, and for anyone who's not familiar with that, it's a set of climbing platforms that are high up within the trees, and it encourages kids and adults to get out and use the forest. And around the area, you get lots of bushcraft shelters and teepees and things like that. The kind of things that people usually mix up with Bigfoot structures, that kind of thing. Now, Connor is used to the woods. He's camped out all of his life, and he does most of his camping off-grid, which means, like me, he doesn't want to be where the tourists are, so he'll move off the trails and into the smaller woodlands. A number of times when he's been high up in the canopy, he's heard his name shouted. And when he's checked in to try and debunk with team members and things like that, he couldn't do it. You've seen a number of shadows, mysterious shadows within the woodlands there. So Connor kindly allowed me to record our conversation, and that's what you're going to hear next.
No, my whole life I've been living in that area, and it's sort of one of those where I'm not too worried. Everyone that I know from my area is well, they like me, I like them. There's a level of respect, so I've never made an enemy.
I mean, I've got to be honest, I've spoken to a few witnesses from Delamere and Cheshire, and I haven't met one yet that didn't know of either another person or one of the other accounts out there. I mean, it seems to be that kind of area, and my research has shown me that from about Crewe all the way through to Jodrell Bank, right through to the Ellesmere Port, we seem to have this band of strange activity.
I find it kind of strange how it's along this sort of path, as you say, from Crewe, and it feels somewhat like at least to Chester, which is like like one of the original Roman roads and such. So it's strange how like that expanse of forest and fields in that area leading up along that ancient Roman road is bringing up all these things. Yeah.
I think there's a tie in there. Most Roman roads were built where we have ley lines. I'm not sure how that happened, if they had a way of tapping into them that we don't understand, but I think that might have a little bit. But you've had some strange experiences in the forest.
Yeah, mostly around Delamere, but then again also Nunsmere, where I used to sometimes as a teenager go camping and such, with either myself or just with friends and such. Yeah.
I don't know Nunsmere. That's not an area I know. I've not visited it. Oh, it's not far away from Delamere.
It's very, very, very close. So Nunsmere is near the village of Cuddington and Sandyway. And it's near it's where Nunsmere Hotel is. And it's a series of lakes, and there's some that have like they have like fishing licenses, so many people go there to fish. It's about there's a handful of lakes, some quite large. And it's a strange area of woods because it seems like this nice quiet place where people can walk their dogs or go fishing and such. And I never heard anything strange until a few years ago after camping in those woods, when I would be told by someone, "Oh, you went camping in Nunsmere. Oh, that's strange. People have been murdered there." And I'm like, that's kind of odd. Why would nobody really tell anyone about this before, going there? So yeah, there's been a series of murders, and I think the most recent one was possibly, I think maybe like 3 decades ago. It was this poor lady who I think was murdered and then was found at a later date, and they never caught who did it. A series of suicides and drownings in the lakes, and it's just a very strange sort of like hotspot that sort of activity. So I tend to like camp next to those lakes in different locations, and me and myself with friends and such, we'd go around the lakes, and occasionally there'd be strange encounters, mostly with other people behaving somewhat erratically.
Right.
Um, I remember I was camping with two of my friends, and we were woken in the early hours to what sounded like low growling, and it came from after a while of being sat in the tent in a bit of shock, because this it sounded like quite a large dog.
Right.
So we peeked out of the tent, and it was a dog. Um, and I think it was two dogs, and the owner, and I don't know why they were doing this. I didn't ask why, but um, they had come to this lake, which is quite secluded. It's behind Nunsmere Hotel,
Mm.
and it's quite popular with kids to go and light a fire and camp
Yeah.
out there. Not so much these days because it's somewhat like private land. But this lady was washing her clothes in in the in
In
the
this,
um in the pond, and and I was like, this is strange, because there's no sort of like camping, like there's no one else camping there. There's no other like cabins or holiday homes and such. And if you're at the hotel staying there, you're not likely going to be coming down to like the lake and washing your clothes. So it seemed kind of strange. I didn't know if it was perhaps a traveler. I don't know, one of the traveling folk. Um, but yeah, it's one of those places, Delamere and Nunsmere, and that sort of area, where I've been, and when you're there, it doesn't feel like a regular forest. It seems somewhat
right.
like the only other place I consider it similar to is the Forest of Dean, which has
Right.
its own wild and strange occurrences, such as people being found in suitcases.
Yes.
Um, Something that happened recently. So I don't know. It's something about um, these sort of primal forests
Yeah,
that
I guess
attract
the
people. Yeah.
ancient ones have a different feel, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wondering maybe if there are a number of people that actually live wild in the UK, believe it or not,
Mm,
that actually just don't cope in society and they take themselves out there. And
mm.
maybe that's what she was doing that day, was just,
Yeah, that's very possible. The amount of land around there that's privatized is quite a lot. So she'd have had to walk quite a distance, otherwise she's camping on private land.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm. I mean,
Mm,
personally, I've only, I think I've been to Delamere 3 times now, and I've only been in the
mm,
daytime. And most people would say that probably to have an experience, I would need to visit at night. But
mm.
talking with you, that's not true, is it?
Oh no, definitely not. It's one of those where I've been going to Delamere since I was a kid. It's really close to where I used to live. And it's quite it's not as large as you'd expect for us to be, but it's large enough, and there's
Yeah,
many different areas, and it's quite diverse. It has some marshland. It has different sort of biomes in there. So um, it's got quite a few visitors. They have like a Go Ape trail and uh, activities and coffee shops and stuff like that. But there comes a point where you can go so far into the forest that you have no clue where you are.
yeah.
And there's a lot of areas that don't have a trail access to and such. Um, and occasionally, because I only recently stumbled upon what people were experiencing in
Mm,
Delamere, so it was quite a surprise that
yeah.
I had somewhat received a similar experience. However, mostly during the day, um, of lights, small
Mm,
floating lights, and like voices and shadows and such like that. And these these would normally be happening on either the small trails that only workers would take and not really the general public, or they would happen out of nowhere whilst I'm surrounded by many other like walkers and such. And yeah, it was quite strange, quite strange. I was at one point working for Go Ape, so I was spending my time in the trees, in the canopies, which gives me like a unique perspective on the forest, and because I've been up there so long. You'd see some very sort of like odd behavior in like the birds there around the marshland as well. And I don't know why that is, but it would sort of be around the same time that I see these like strange sort of like orb-like lights. Um, and they wouldn't be high in the forest trees. Like they'd be quite low to the ground,
Right.
but always as if they were like 10 or 15 steps ahead. Um, and Yeah, especially with these voices and such, they normally come through, and I immediately suspect it's from like the walkie-talkie that we're given,
Okay.
the staff, because we have a couple of frequencies that you can run off. And immediately you think, oh, okay, someone's called me, I'll check in. So I check in with the cabin base and say, "Oh, did anyone call my name? Is everything okay? Am I required?" And they'd be like, "No, no, no one's called you." And it would happen maybe once or twice a week,
Right.
um, and it wouldn't happen to anyone else that I know of, because I'd hear it through the comms. Um, but yeah, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's kind of strange. I must have possibly heard it from one of the visitors, and it turned out it wouldn't be, because if I was with a worker, they would clarify after me asking them, "Did you hear anything?" And they'd respond with, "No, no, didn't hear anything like that." And we have to keep very aware of what's going on, because we're looking after the safety of the visitors and such.
Yeah.
So we have to keep focused, eyes, ears. So it was kind of unnerving at times, because sometimes it would sound like it's in the distance, but other times much closer, as if even my staff that might be standing next to me called my name.
Right.
Um, and Yeah, I'm not sure where these like sort of phantom sounds were coming from. But it would only happen in that forest. It never happened in Nunsmere. It was always localized to Delamere, and I haven't been there for quite a while now, quite a few years. But I've heard recently, or recently found out that it's sort of similar to other people's experiences there that have been going on for decades, and people with more extreme experiences at night, especially. Yeah.
It's well known for lights, Delamere Forest. The ancients would call them fairy lights. It's a light or an orb that tends to draw you deeper into the forest, and as
Mm,
you said, keeps a certain pace of you all of the time. You never catch it.
mm,
Some people will hear like a whispering, chattering, or they'll say, you can hear people speaking, but you can't make out what it is that they're saying.
mm,
And then they're full on calling your name as your name's being called.
mm,
Yeah, and you do have a unique viewpoint because you're looking from quite high up, whereas a
mm.
normal visitor like me doesn't get to see that the forest. But I do understand this concept because where I am at Winter Hill, it's a similar setup. In the daytime, it's lovely and bright, and there's lots of trails, and people get an ice cream or a coffee and they walk around. But as dusk hits, even at the Go Ape Centre, there's nobody out there. There's no street
Yeah.
or anything like that. And it does change. It's almost like an anonymous feel to it. And that's just not me being spooky or like because I'm thinking about spooky things. There is a physical change within the forest. It feels differently.
Mm.
And I think Delamere is quite similar to that. You don't get a whole lot of people that actually wild camping Delamere. It's normally
Mm.
on the outskirts of the forest.
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
number of campers that have camped out and said that they've heard howling,
Mm.
especially on the satellite trail. A number of people on the satellite trail have reported a dog-like howl.
Mm. Yeah,
Mm,
I think Delamere is considered it's definitely one of the oldest forests in England, and especially what you were mentioning before about there's like fairy those lights.
like,
Um, I've the only other time I've seen something possibly similar to that is during my times at Stonehenge,
right.
because I attend the um, solstice festival every
Mhm.
summer. Um, and it's sort of similar things there. Like you'll sometimes at night, like close to like the villages, not Salisbury, but closer to the fields around Stonehenge, you'll see sort of like these orbs and such. And this you sometimes think, oh, okay, it's probably someone shining their flashlight coming back to the um to the festival like tents and festival site. But no, there's only sometimes one trail that comes this way. So yeah, at night it's hard to explain.
The correlation for me is that
Mm.
the age of the areas. Delamere is one of our ancient forests.
Mm.
Like you said, like the Forest of Dean and the New
Mm.
Forest. They're ancient, they're old. They used to be much more mixed in the woodland than there are
Mm.
now. Far more species than we have now. The fact that it has mere in there is simply because mere means an area where birds will congregate on low water. So it had,
Mm.
if you could imagine being a very early human and we're kind of attracted to places with good energy.
Mm.
When you come across over Elderly Edge, what you'd see is a vast, it would have been like Eden, I suppose, to some
Ah,
people.
yeah.
Lots of fishing, there's lots of habitat, there's lots of food sources,
Mm.
lots of gathering places. And you tend to find that you get menhirs or standing stones in areas like that. And we're still attracted to them as human beings. We still, you seem to have a certain energy for some of us. But I think with you working there, and your connection to nature, I think that might be why you're picking up on things that other people aren't picking up on. Like a
Yeah.
singular hearing the name or a voice, they
Mm.
could pass that off. They get in the car and go home and just pass it off as nothing. But
Mm.
you are used to the sounds there and you're used to what's going on there. Like you say, you try to debunk it. You
Mm.
haven't just accepted it automatically. You've checked it wasn't your radio. You've asked him with other staff. You
Mm.
can't explain it. It's an unexplainable event. I mean, I got to be honest. If something was calling my name in the wood,
Mm.
I'd remember.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. I guess if it was a visitor in my position, they would possibly brush it off as someone another visitor calling someone else. Um, but with the amount of times that I'm spending in the canopies and on like singular trails where it's sort of they're very tight trails that are covered in bushes and they lead away from the main public paths and they're not on the maps. Um, and it's in those sort of like locations where you would see sort of these lights and sometimes hovering over the marsh that's sort of like uh, around the central part of the forest. Yeah, but I think there is definitely a connection between like Delamere and Forest of Dean and I think the land around like Stonehenge and such. And it's I don't know if it might have correlation to the that area of land that used to connect England to Europe. I think it's called Doggerland. It was called
Yes, Doggerland.
before it
Yeah.
was taken by the sea. So it's strange how like these areas that I've seen these things, they're only in areas that have rather like a rich Celtic history.
Yes.
So it's I mean, someone could say it's coincidental, um, but once you're in the situation of seeing these lights and hearing these voices, and you're on your own, and you don't get affected by this any time you're outside of the forest.
Yeah.
It's it's hard to find a reasonable explanation.
I don't think there is a reasonable
Yeah.
explanation. We can come up with as many as we want to, because you've seen like shadows. I remember you saying that you'd seen shadows.
Yeah.
Explain that a little bit for me.
So with working in a forest, and you're there from morning to, well, basically sunrise till sunset in my case. You're kind of aware of like the sun coming through the trees, and the trees casting shadows, and it's all very like a sort of like uh, um, a natural um, a natural span through the day where tree shells will move. You'll not see anything different really. Nothing will stand out.
Yeah.
And from working there, you'll be used to it. But now and then you'll see sort of like it's normally towards the end of my shift at least.
Right.
As I'm making sure that all different sites are secure, that you sometimes catch uh, shadows, and they're normally low to the ground,
Right.
and you'll probably at first think, it's possibly a bird that's gone overhead, but it's definitely not, because you're in some situations you are completely covered. If you look up, you will just see the canopies of trees. There's no sky, and there's nothing being cast by birds, and um, there would be some light still coming through. It wouldn't be completely dark, but the light would be going, and yet the shadows would be very distinct, and they would move quite sharp and erratic, and low to the ground. And you may think, oh, okay, it's a visitor, that's I don't know, possibly a jogger even, because there's plenty of those in Delamere, but not again, not on the trails. Not
Yeah.
this is in like the deep sort of deep part of the forest,
Mm.
and occasionally, if you couldn't hear a shadow, if you couldn't see a shadow, you would sometimes hear. Um, it's hard to explain. Sometimes it would come as a rustling of bushes, and
Right.
sometimes it would come as very light footsteps. Not that of a rabbit or like a
Yeah.
badger and stuff like that. It would be heavier than that, but sort of as if a child is following you, I guess. It would be like the footsteps of a child running. Um, and you'd hear that behind you on the trail. Um, and you constantly have one eye over your shoulder when hearing this, because any sound of like activity from visitors would always be localized in certain paths, certain sites. So
Yeah.
there's no reason for anyone to really go into that part of the woods. And especially if someone is not making a noise and they're following you from a sort of like safe distance,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's there were some unnerving times where I was tempted to just keep my radio on hand, because it that did sound like someone would be coming up on me from behind, and
Right.
um yeah, so and that would sometimes pair with the sort of peripheral shadows that
Yeah.
would come into view. And yeah, as soon as you leave the forest, they'd stop. You'd only have to be outside the visitor centre, and they stop.
Mm.
However, I know there's different types of experiences that happen on the outskirts of Delamere.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's those deep areas of woodland that don't have much contact from visitors, where someone could easily get lost, and if they're injured, they could easily be forgotten about.
Yeah.
Um, it's yeah, it's definitely unnerving in that situation where something you think could be following you.
I would call that shadowing. Lots of people describe it, and this
Mm,
peripheral, this
mm,
running on the peripheral vision. That I kind of get that when I'm in the woods, because, and I think it's because I'm so used to the woodland
mm,
that I can pick up on it quite quickly. Because what a lot of people will do, if I take them out investigating or anything like that, they immediately walk into the woodland, and I look at my husband
mm,
and I say, right, that's it, it's over and done with for the night now, isn't it?
mm.
I tend to sit in an area silently
Mm,
and just, I call it the rhythm of the forest. But once you sit quietly for long enough, then critters start to move about. You
mm,
get used to the shadow plays, because obviously with my fear, it can evoke fear in me. I had to teach myself all of these things again. That
mm,
the stone clacking that I'd hear is a blackbird, you know. So
mm,
when something strange, it really stands out to me.
mm,
And I've spoken to other people, like either tree surgeons or biologists, other people who work in the forest, who say there was just something off about it, just didn't fit. I couldn't
mm,
tell you what it was, but it wasn't anything I could identify.
mm,
There's quite recently in Epping Forest, there's a really decent capture of something moving very quickly between the two trees, and it just looks like something all dark in one colour that just
mm,
moves way faster than a human would move
mm.
between the two trees. And it's kind of like that I see when I notice the shadows. What are they like for you? I know you said they're low to the ground.
I'd best describe them as a sort of small, childlike.
Right.
Um, at times, it would happen to such a degree that you're thinking, "Oh, this is somewhat mischievous in nature."
Yeah.
And yeah, it's difficult to when you're in that moment to come up with a explanation in your head, because it's not something you've experienced before, or maybe it's not something you've known about before going into the woods. So
Mm.
you'd imagine, oh, okay, I've spent too much time in the woods. My eyes are playing tricks on me, possibly. However, there are some days that you're working twice as hard and you don't see anything at all. And I think it affects, well, most of the staff that would have worked there. Well, possibly not the voices, but
Mm.
most likely the shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It'd
But
be interesting to chat with him, wouldn't it? To see
yeah,
just how
yeah,
many of them had witnessed something.
definitely, definitely. Um, and yeah, I think it's strange how it's not just correlated to one
Mm.
specific area. It's multiple forests, but there's sort of like, as you were saying before, you'd sometimes get this sort of like feeling, that it's sort of an ominous feeling, and I guess that's sort of like our natural sixth
Yeah.
sense, or sort of like being aware that the potential of danger is there, and um, I believe in forests like that, the potential is there,
Yeah.
um, from these sort of experiences, but whether or not it's just mischievous, or it does have some sort of uh, unnatural intention.
That's
Um,
it. I mean, we don't
yeah,
know, do we? We don't really know
yeah,
why this is happening.
yeah,
Uh, it's almost like something's trying to get your attention, calling
yeah.
your name, and the quick running round at the side of you.
Mm,
I have heard of it before. I've heard of it from quite a few people, to be
mm,
honest. Even the shadowing, the footsteps. I'm just thinking in my mind now all of the
mm,
cases that I've done that are very similar. There's a chap close to Delamere, the road that goes around Delamere, where the old cafe used to be, where the
mm,
train station
mm,
cafeteria. And he doesn't believe in cryptids, paranormal, or anything. And he was driving, and he said it jumped, whatever it was, it jumped from the left-hand side of the road to the right and headed into the forest. And he said it was a grey humanoid shape. So it wasn't solid or a person. It kind of had that shape to it, but it leapt across the road. And I wondered if we were dealing with energy of some kind. Especially with the number of times that people have reported these orb lights or these lights actually above the forest, almost like UFO light that light up the whole forest. Maybe we could be dealing with energy of some kind, and each one of us, like you or I, as we tune in, see it slightly differently because it's unique to each person. But you said, like you said yourself, it's not like it's happening in other woodlands that you visit.
Yeah.
It's not a regular thing that's happening. It's when you're in that spot.
Yeah, it's always localized to places like Delamere Forest and Solstice Festival sort of area around Stonehenge. But yeah, it could be. There's potential that it's energy, and when you think of like how animals interact with humans,
Yeah.
what some people might perceive to be threatening, and it could be threatening in the mind of an animal.
Yeah.
It could just be them being playful, for example, like orcas, gorillas, all these different animals when interacting with humans, either they don't know their own strength, or there's cases where they could have some sort of like intent of harm sometimes, possibly not. But how would we know? We can't look into their mind. Same with energy. I'd say you can only connect into whatever energy is there to such a degree. However, there's always that sort of those ominous feelings that sort of pull you away from, as you said, like those lights
Yeah.
that could lead you down. And it's kind of strange because I didn't know about other people's experience around the forest
Yeah.
until I moved to London.
Right.
So that is the strange thing, because I spent like most of my life in that area. I'm in my late 20s now, and since moving to London, it was kind of strange how I just happened upon this information, um, just just through Google,
Right.
of people with similar accounts after searching up Delamere. Not Delamere strange occurrences, just Delamere into Google. And from where I'm sitting in London, that's how I learned about everyone else's experiences. So it's kind of strange. And then there's everything from I think I read at some point there were sightings of people wearing robes
Yes.
deep in the forests, and there'd be some sort of ritualistic
Yeah. Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether that's satanic or druidic, because they're very different things.
Yeah, exactly. But they could.
Um,
It depends on the viewer, doesn't it?
yeah,
Some
yeah,
viewers instantly jump to the dark side and say, "Oh,
yeah,
rogue figures in the woods, it's probably
mm,
going to be a sacrifice." Well, that's a way of people that worship
yeah,
the woods themselves, like the old dryads
mm,
and things like that. It
mm,
is a magical place. All forests and woodlands have a heartbeat, and I think
mm,
if you spend enough time in them, you get used to that rhythm and that heartbeat, and that kind of clues us into when
mm,
something's really strange going on.
mm,
And it, like you, there's lots of people who, myself included, an area most of your life. I'd never heard of anything Winter Hill, and I've known it my entire
mm,
life until I started doing what I'm doing, probably 35 years later, before I started to speak to other witnesses who were experiencing
mm.
not so much the same thing that I saw. Then Winter Hill, as in Delamere, most of the creatures that are seen are kind of canine in origin.
Ah, yeah.
Dogman, werewolf, that kind of thing. Not a whole lot of like Bigfoot or Wildman accounts from those areas. But
Mm,
Salisbury Plain and Stonehenge, yeah, there's quite a few what you'd class as a Bigfoot kind of creature, like a woodwose or something like that. Even seen by the army members. So I think Delamere is one of those places where you get lots of different kinds of phenomena. Lots of, I can never get that word right, but you know what I mean? There's not just the one thing like people would say, oh, Epping
Mm.
Forest, that's known for. And I don't think areas are known for just one thing. I think there's lots of
Mm.
different stuff going on, but it's all being reported on different sites. So you got the
Mm.
paranormal sites are reporting there, and cryptid witnesses are reporting on those sites, and
Mm.
getting people together and talking about Delamere is how we'll find out these other stories.
Yeah, because no doubt plenty of other people have had experiences similar to what's already out there, but perhaps they themselves were in my position and they had no idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's strange. It's not localized to just England, of course, as well. It's I think there's a forest in Romania
Mm-hmm.
that's quite infamous for its lights and throughout history, entire armies disappearing within the forest and never being found again, and in recent times, children going into the forest only to come back 10 years later.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's very strange, and I guess it's very primordial. Our forests in England as well. Um, yeah, but it's I'm kind of curious about these things now because
Yeah.
I just happened upon it without any like third party interference. I just had these experiences myself, and that was even before I became interested
Yeah.
in Stonehenge and sort of like these pagan culture as well. And I guess through my experiences and by chance and luck of being invited to the Solstice Festival
Yeah.
a couple of years back, now I'm a regular there, and I get to meet people that have a sort of similar viewpoint that in these areas it is energy, it is uh, unexplained happenings in these forests, and um, the best way that we can sort of continue those experiences and in a safe manner
Yeah.
is, as you said, getting in tune with like the rhythm of the forest, because I believe as long as if you can do that and remember that these happenings aren't always
Negative.
maleficent and negative, um, then that's the best way to go about it. But of course, always don't go blindly. Don't go blindly, because I know I guess there are times if one is connected in that way and they're so in tune with the forest, they can somewhat lose themselves,
Yes.
and and it could feel like an hour has gone by when you've been there the whole day.
And the other way
Yeah,
around, some people have been there for a moment and just suddenly no recollection of why they're there, or
yeah,
people have said that they know the forest like the back of their hand, but they are suddenly completely lost. I
mm,
spoke to one lady who walked around for 2 hours trying to find a gate.
mm,
And she played in those woods her entire life. And she just said, I started to panic. I'm a grown woman and I literally started to panic. I just
mm,
couldn't find my way back to the car park. And it happens more than people realise, I think. But
mm.
most folk get in the car and go home shocked because there isn't really anywhere that you can share that with. It's not a number you
Yeah.
can phone and say, this has happened today, and then someone's going to correlate it for you.
Mm,
It's like you say about Delamere, you stumbled on those stories after you'd moved away and
mm.
you're living in London now. Would you go back? Would you go back and camp at night knowing those stories?
Definitely, definitely. I guess after living in the area so long, I lived in I think it was Winsford for about 12
Yeah,
years, and sort of like the other areas around Delamere for the rest of my time. And I'd only recently moved to London.
right.
Um, so I do tend to go back to visit family and friends. However, camping in the woods in those certain areas, it's not so much the strange occurrences that have me sort of off guard. It would be people.
Right.
So I've from what I've experienced, when I moved to London, people often warn me, "Oh, be careful, London's quite dangerous."
Mm.
And I'd be like, "Oh, okay, I'll keep that in mind." And from living here, and like traveling throughout central London, different times of the day, it's 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 nothing like my area, because I
Right.
think it's in the culmination of villages and towns around Delamere. It's quite a spike in like violence and just all things negative. I think
Yes.
it was especially in Delamere. I think it was a few decades ago. There was like was it a triple homicide or something with a shotgun? I think it was. And that's specifically to the forest, but also in the areas. But there's countless attacks, murders. You can just be walking down the street and you'll get jumped. Not too long ago, a mate of mine got jumped by about 5 to 7 lads and had his legs broken. It's one of those where whatever the energy is
Yeah.
in Nunsmere and Delamere, I believe that if there is a negative energy, it's being fed by the neighboring towns and villages and the people in them, because
That makes sense. Yeah, that
yeah,
makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I
yeah,
understand what you mean. Where I live, it's absolutely beautiful. You can
mm,
drive out for 10 minutes, you can see all the way to Wales.
yeah,
Absolutely beautiful. But
mm,
the crime is
mm,
astronomical. I
mm,
mean, 2 weeks ago here, a 15-year-old boy stabbed another 14-year-old. It's constant.
yeah,
It's become so often that people don't really comment on it anymore. It's not
mm,
as shocking as it used to be.
mm,
And I'm a great believer, like you. I think once you start to play into that negative energy and you feed
mm,
it, that becomes ever more powerful. So
mm,
trusting people to trust the gut and like
mm,
trust that feeling. If you walk somewhere, whether that be a woodland or a supermarket or anywhere, and you get that, oh
mm,
no, hairs on the back of your neck go up, listen to it, like
mm,
take it seriously because it can keep you alive. There are a lot of, as I would call them, subhumans out there who don't care about anybody else other than themselves,
mm,
And like you, Connor, I don't fear the woods anymore. But I would, if I was in the woodland and I saw another human being,
mm,
that I would be wary.
mm,
I'm
yeah,
thinking I'm a female on my own, There's a
mm,
lot of strange things that happen to young ladies. My husband was out walking the dog a couple of nights ago, and in an area where there's nobody. It's not a place where you go and walk your dogs. There's
mm,
nobody anywhere. And he said he had his hood down, and he presumed that this guy thought he was a female. And as he's walked,
uh,
guys come out of the woods just straight away right there. And then obviously my husband stood up, and the guys run off back into the woods. He was looking for a female victim.
oh, that's worrying.
That's
I
very,
think,
very worrying. So, and that's
yeah,
happening everywhere, isn't it? It's not just.
mm. Yeah, it's not just like the major cities. It's happening in like villages and towns. And I don't know what like the this sudden spike in those sort of like crimes. I
Mm,
don't know what the cause is there, but it's strange how you have like these idyllic sort of classic English
well,
towns and
yeah,
villages that tourists would be like, oh wow, look,
yeah.
thatch roofs and sort of like Tudor-esque buildings. But behind like the aesthetic of it all, it's
There's a
becoming,
darkness, isn't there? There's a
yeah,
darkness to some places. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, I'm trying to think of a quote. Someone gave me a quote years ago, and it was "Beware." I'll probably not get it right now, but it was "Beware of nice things because they can hide evil" or something along them
mm,
lines. I didn't know what she meant, and she said like some of the most prettiest, nicest people you can meet are the darkest souls on the inside. And some places and villages feel like that,
mm.
like dark places. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost as if they're luring people in.
Yeah, yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Well, then we have to get you back on, Connor, and we'll have another chat because we'd have to touch on all of the missing. There are quite a number of missing pets,
Mm,
missing animals, and missing humans. from Delamere Forest. We have the reports of that screaming. Three
Banshee.
reports,
Yeah.
3 reports over 30 years of something screaming. One woman said it sounded like it was gurgling blood when she heard it. That is absolutely terrifying to hear that when you're on your own with the dog.
Yeah, yeah. I've noticed that there's quite a huge amount of missing, especially like young people
Yeah.
in forests. Yeah, it's kind of worrying. I had my own experience with losing someone to the forest.
Right.
So it's very strange that these are always happening, especially in like rural villages and
Mm.
towns. Yeah,
It
yeah.
is. It's sad, isn't it? I just think what's great for me is you're only in your 20s. So when I was in my 20s, nobody was having conversations like these.
Mm,
Nobody. It just wasn't discussed. So you couldn't
mm,
discuss anything really, not even a paranormal sighting or a UFO.
yeah.
So for me to be able to have a conversation with someone that's my daughter's generation, it's incredibly refreshing. And the
Mm,
generation below you guys are really accepting.
mm,
They're just
yeah.
incredibly accepting that strange things happen to people. So like I see it in my grandchildren. For me, there was a lot of that's that girl who seems monsters, but it seems very different now. It's kind of they accept
Yeah.
that people see strange things, and that's really heartwarming for me because we've needed that change for a long, long time. I'm trying to put a team of people together all across the UK that are just interested in just getting together with other people and talking about this subject as a whole, whether it's over a cup of coffee or whatever it is. If we all talk about our strange experiences, what we've gone through in life, eventually it'll just become normal. It's normal to share them. We'll normalize the subjects, and that's
Mm,
what I'm striving
yeah.
for. And so, you know,
Yeah, these things take like time and effort and especially just trusting in the changing of the times that next generation will be accepting and more open. I guess with social media now,
yeah,
it's one of those where people are opening more on a younger stage in life than experiencing these things and not telling a soul until much later.
no, it's absolutely refreshing. So I'm going to close it now if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
Don't
it's fine.
I'm just going to say good night. I would like you to come back on. I've got a few propositions for you actually when we hang up. If you
Oh,
just,
okay.
but I will be back next week at the same time. And if you want to join us, you can actually. There's a chat box now that opens on YouTube, and you can actually chat with us or ask us questions. Or if you've got a question for Connor, you can put it in there, or you can contact me on one of the social media links below, or just email me. And I will make sure that Connor gets your messages, and then we'll get him back on for some more answers. So I'll see you all next week. Good night, everyone.